right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's session. On behalf of everyone at Rev.io, I'd like to thank you for joining us today. I'm Delaney Dabkowski, Rev.io's Marketing Execution Manager. Before we begin the presentation, I'd like to go over a few housekeeping items. First, the audio will automatically come in through your computer speakers. Second, a recorded version of this webinar will be emailed to you within 2 weeks. Third, we will be having a Q&A session at the end of the event, so please submit your questions via the Zoom control panel at any point during the live presentation. For those of you just joining us, welcome. Today, Thomas Ginter, Sales Support Engineer, and Robin Erkkila, 911 Sales Engineer with Bandwidth, will be discussing an Eerie E911 update. Thomas is a certified professional engineer and 911 industry veteran. His focus on emergency services began in 1995, where he chaired the Telecommunications Industry Association Working Group on Emergency Services and was contributing author to the resulting standards. He has been engaged in the design, development, and deployment of emergency services technologies supporting cellular, 2G, 3G, and 4G wireless mobile systems, for VoIP 911 systems, for text to 911 systems, all on a national scale, as well as statewide systems for next generation 911. Thomas holds a dozen U.S. patents in the area of emergency services, wireless location determination, financial fraud analytics, and SIM card technology. His most recent patent, US 10,367,947, was issued in July 2019 and is titled Techniques for Migrating Legacy 911 Systems to NG 911 Systems. Robin has worked in the public safety technology industry for over 16 years. He has held senior level positions with many companies, including Intrado and Telecommunication Systems and Westel International. Robin has had extensive experience deploying solutions in several segments of the 911 industry, from originating service provider networks to PSAPs and NG 911 ESINet solutions in between. Many of the enterprise regional systems, statewide NG 911 networks, and several rural PSAPs have benefited from Robin's expertise. He currently leverages his subject matter expertise for the Bandwidth sales organization. As the Bandwidth 911 SE, Robin supports 911 business development and strategies. Without further ado, I'll turn it over to Thomas and Robin.
Hey, good afternoon, folks. This is Thomas. Thank you very much for that very kind introduction. Today, we're going to be covering a number of topics, and I want to give you first a little snippet, a story of how this zombie apocalypse, Halloween kind of themed webinar came about. Would be about 3 years ago now that I was in a customer meeting, very long, detailed meeting, talking about many of the things we're going to touch on today. And at the very end of the discussion, a director of 911 asked me, okay, that's all well and good, Thomas, but what happens to your 911 system in the midst of a zombie apocalypse? And it was a lighthearted question, but it was a good question. It's the kind of question that says, what happens under load? What happens under congestion? What happens under 911 spikes? How resilient is the technology? And it was done in a playful way using the zombie apocalypse, as opposed to the kind of grim, emergency services scenarios that are often talked about. So we ate it up. It was a great discussion. We blogged on it for now a couple of years, and this webinar we bring out at Halloween to, again, playfully deal with some various serious topics in 911 and emergency services. So with no further ado, grab your bowl of Halloween candy. You're going to get to know some 911 tricks. You're going to get some 911 treats to be able to provide your Rev.io clients in turn. We're going to talk about three things. We're going to talk about regulatory updates. Everyone is probably on this webinar because of the regulatory shift that's taking place right now. The second is technology shifts. There's just a lot of updates on technology, and we're going to try to rattle through as many of them here as we possibly can. And at the end of this webinar, our very final slide is about a dozen best practices that are pragmatic, and we're going to try to riffle through as many of those as we can. This presentation will take about 35 more minutes, maybe 40, okay? But we do have a full hour, so that last 20 minutes, if you have a question and you want to put it to us, please use the IM, because we want to have at least a third of our time given back to you for your specific considerations. Robin, can you flip forward? All right. What's the challenge? The challenge is a collision of two bodies of complexity in the 911 industry. The first body of complexity is technology. There are still POTS lines out there. There are still PRI lines out there. The world is shifting to voice over IP on-prem, and from on-prem into the cloud into CPaaS, Computing Platform as a Service services. You, Rev.io clients, are right in the middle of this as ILEX or CLEX or two-way voice over IP providers, being able to see the shift from enterprises that had on-prem systems and going to cloud systems, going from fixed phones to nomadic phones, to laptop calling, to tablet calling, to just an app on the phone that might have the same phone number as the physical device on your desk. All of that complexity, from PRI and POTS that still exist today, with all of these new technologies, creates all kinds of complexity on the technology side, multiple solutions, multiple approaches. And of course, on the right-hand side of the screen, the rules are changing. We have federal issuances of Kari's law, which we are now in under effect. We have the promulgation. Now, there's a nice Halloween scary word. Promulgation of Raybomb's Act in 2021 and 2022. We have state-level MLTS requirements that have evolved over time. And so we've got these two pieces of tech complexity, technology and rules. They intersect, and we're going to try to tease those parts out today for you. Robin, could you flip forward? Okay. Again, playful. Zombies are going to be attacking, and we're going to talk about that a little bit lighthearted. Robin, why don't you start off with explaining what this device is and how it creates a problem that the new regulations are trying to solve?
Thanks, Thomas. Yeah, very good. And I did love your picture at the beginning. It's very a nice ghoulish to the a couple ugly mugs there. But anyway, yeah. So what is this? This is you guys will probably recognize this. A lot of people run into these every day, right? This is a key card access lock. It's very effective at preventing zombies, but more importantly, it's effective at preventing first responders from accessing an emergency or an incident that might be going on behind a door at a business or at a large building. And so that's the gist of this, right? Imagine a situation where we're behind the door here. It's an office building, if you will. And a 911 call is placed, somebody broke their leg, right? Zombies are getting into the building and somebody panicked and jumped around and ended up breaking their leg. And their colleague picks up the phone and dials 911. And what needs to happen here is when the first responders show up on site, they need to be able to get back behind this key lock. And so that's why we've got things like Kari's Law and Raybomb's Act. And they actually work together to make this happen. So speaking of Kari's Law, what is it and why is this important, right? There are three aspects of Kari's Law we want to go over here real quick. Number one is the removal of a prefix when calling 911. So this has been pretty well adopted already. Not a huge deal, but it is part of Kari's Law. And the issue of it is that you don't want to have to dial any other prefix access code number, such as an 8 or a 9, when you dial 911. You just want to pick up any phone device, whether I'm in a hotel room or I'm in that office building, and dial 911, right? Now, kind of hand in hand with that, another aspect of Kari's Law is this notification, and that really gets back to that key card access we were talking about. A notification, Kari's Law says that a notification needs to go to a party that can assist the first responders when they show up in the time of a 911 call. So basically what happens is when somebody picks up a phone, dials 911 from that office phone, a notification needs to go to like the front desk of that office building. And so that when the first responders show up on site, they can hook up with that security guard or front desk person and get that key card access into where the emergency is, right? So that's one of the key aspects of Kari's Law. The compliance date for Kari's Law was earlier this year in 2020, so it is in full effect. An interesting thing about Kari's Law is that it does go hand in hand with Raybaum's Act. And Raybaum's Act is really all about dispatchable locations. And so we're only 77 days away from the deadline in January of 2021 for Raybaum's Act for delivering a dispatchable location um, for a 911 call for fixed VoIP or what sometimes we call static VoIP phones, right? And so, Thomas, why don't you dig into some of the techniques, the technology behind how this can happen?
Absolutely. As I was listening to you, it struck me that gnawing at the back of the mind of some of our listeners might be, well, Bandwidth, do you have the products that comply with Kari's Law, and do you have the products that comply with Raybaum's Act with that location? The answer is absolutely yes. Now, from what's on the screen here, we're going to take you through what happens in a legacy system, and then increasingly get into more complex instances. But what you're seeing here is circa 1990. You've got an enterprise, you've got a PBX, private branch exchange, a little telephone switch in the middle of the building, and it's connected through a PRI trunk, private rate exchange, over to the public switch telephone network. It's a local connection, and that in turn is attached to the PSAP, the Public Safety Answering Point, or 911 center. So this is your very typical 911 interconnection diagram. At the bottom right corner, you see the blue ALI database. That's the database that contains the telephone number and matching address. And that database is queried by the PSAP, by the 911 call center, when a 911 call arrives, so that they can say, oh, this call is from, ABC Industries at 123 Main Street, and the telephone that's, has made the 911 call is 919-555-1000, something like that, okay? And the important thing to take away from here is twofold. Number one, all of these technologies have evolved to voice over IP or cloud technologies, but the same constraint exists. And the constraint is there could be 100 extensions on each of the 5 floors of that building that don't have a DID. And when they dial 911, that PBX or soft switch now is going to be outpulsing an ANI, a calling line ID, of just the building, but the extension can't pass through the PSTN, doesn't pass through a VoIP SIP invite, arrives at the public safety answering point only as the North American numbering plan 10 digits. And the only data that can be extracted is the main address of the building. Floor level information is not possible. And Robin, is floor level information required for Raybaum's Act?
Absolutely. So
okay.
Let's dig into this and talk about, let's take that leg breaking issue, accident that happened in a building, and let's pick it apart a little bit and dig into some more detail. And so what we've got is someone breaks their leg in a building. I want to use my building, right? I work in a building in downtown Denver that has about 8 floors on it. We have an office suite on the 5th floor. And so if we've got the zombies coming up from the ground level, they've incurred into our building, and they've somehow, somebody's broken a leg, I'm going to pick up my phone, I'm going to call 911. Again, I'm on the 5th floor of that building, right? Historically, from that last diagram that Thomas showed you guys, historically, right, we had just that front, the address, 123 Main Street, that would be presented to 911, and the first responders would show up. What really needs to happen though now is let's say I called 911 from my laptop soft phone. I've got several there available to me, soft phones. I call 911, and first and foremost, we present that 123 Main Street address, but that's not enough information for the first responders to get to where they're at. They show up, there's 8 floors there. Which floor do they go to? Not only do they need to get to the 5th floor, but they also need to get to the room number or the suite, at least the suite information or the suite number for the floor I'm on. And so that's where we get into delivering what we're calling line 2 information to the public safety answering point. Line 1 is an address. It's the front door that they're getting to. And line 2 is a more detailed information that includes the floor number and more information that's associated with the 911 call or the actual incident. And so, how do we get there, Thomas?
Okay, so this next step is going to be dealing with floor level information example. We'll get more complicated yet, but one step at a time. So you'll see that we've augmented now on the diagram with a bunch more information. Beside the bill on the right-hand side, we have 100 extensions, like I described, the 100 series for the first floor, the 200 series for the second floor, and so on. And on the right-hand side, we're now going to introduce more telephone numbers for the purposes of 911 call control and data display. Remember, this building still has only one telephone number that it's using to get in and out calls, and then when calls arrive, you hear a little voice announcement that says, type the 3 digits of the extension that you want. People still do this today, to conserve money, buy less phone numbers. But for the purposes of 911, that single building number is no longer good enough. And now what we have to do is add a series of proxy numbers shown on the left-hand side of the building. In the industry, these are commonly called ELINs, or Emergency Line Identification Number. Different platforms have different names for this, but that's a common term. What it means is a proxy number that's going to be substituted during the event of a 911 call. Now, over on the right-hand side, you see that ALI database. That's where that name, number, white pages data is going to be stored so that public safety can dip it. And now we see that we have not just the main building number, but we have these 5 numbers, one for each floor of the building, identifying 123 Main Street, just as before, but now including address line 2, what in Raybom's Act is called the dispatchable location, floor 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. So if you flip forward, we can now make a 911 call. From extension 307 on the 3rd floor, the PBX goes, oh, it's a 911 call. I can't outpulse my normal number. I can't outpulse as the ANI or as the calling line ID 919-555-1000. That's the number that was on the previous screen. You may not have made a note of it. But here it goes, we can't do that because all that will show up at public safety is the 919-555-1000, and the only data that will display is 123 Main Street. We instead need to, and this is the PBX, whether it's a PBX or a VoIP system or an Avaya system, a Cisco Call Manager system, a ShoreTel, Mitel, they're all doing this today, okay? Where they have this capability that says, okay, extension 307 made the call. What's my proxy number for the 3rd floor? Oh, 919-555-1003. That call routes through, and you see the red line, over to the public switch telephone network, arrives at public safety. The number presents on the screen, 919-555-1003. The PSAP, public safety answering point, the 911 call center, dips the ALI database, and lo and behold, and presto, on the screen just above the PSAP, we can now display 123 Main Street and floor 3. This is a very common practice in the industry. So the pro is, we got floor level information. It was easy now using this technique. The drawback is we didn't get suite level information, right? So as we go through Raybom's Act compliances, we have to ask ourselves, either A, do we need to add proxy numbers for every suite or room on a floor, or do we need to do something more? Flip forward. Everything that I've described so far was a single building, a single 911 call center, and a single 911 call, simplex. I want to have the Rev.io participants here expand their perspective just a little bit, because what we're talking about isn't just the simplex solution, particularly with bandwidth. So bandwidth is connected to all approximately 6,000 911 call centers in the nation. We've got on the order of 20 million 911 records that are supporting plethora of, that's a scary word, plethora. I'll try to use that one a second time today. Plethora buildings, enterprises, soft switch clients, just like you. And so don't think of this as a single isolated service in a municipality. We're talking about many-to-many relationships, many clients like yourselves, many enterprises that you're serving, and then literally thousands of 911 call centers. And pretty quick, we're going to get into the zombie apocalypse, what happens to that network. But here we have, within bandwidth's domain of offering national solutions. You want to flip forward, Robin? Okay. I promised sort of 3 stages. The first one was what's legacy, and that was 1 number per building, didn't provide floor level information. Then we went through the second example with that ELIN, which provided floor level information, or you could add additional proxy numbers to get additional suites, but that's adding phone numbers. Now we take a step, and remember, at the very beginning I said new technology, next generation 911, changes at the PSAPs. And so here, what we now have is something called dynamic location routing. And this is a fundamental change to the way that voice over IP calls behave. Standard voice over IP call that we've just been talking about, I won't get too technical on you, but the session initiation protocol invite is identified by a phone number only. When we step into true RABOMS Act compliant products, okay, you have laptops and tablets and phones, oh my, making these 911 calls. And what we're going to do is pick up the location context down to the room level of where that physical device is at the time of the call. Remember, that laptop could move from room to room or floor to floor and then make a 911 call. And so we're going to separate out the data sets. We're going to have a series of locations identifying every room in a building, and then the telephone number of the physical device. And at time of call, that VoIP call setup, that session initiation protocol, is now going to contain 2 identifiers, one for the device and one for the location of the device. Remember, that location of the device is coming in at call setup time, not something that was provisioned 3 months ago. And so this is the technique called dynamic location routing, or in next generation language, SIP PITA flow or geolocation headers. And this is at the crux of some of the most modern products. Some are still in development, but folks like, for example, Microsoft Teams uses this technique so that laptops that wander around in a Microsoft Teams tenant environment pick up the location of, oh, I'm by this Wi-Fi access point. Oh, that means I'm on the 3rd floor in the cafeteria. And that's how modern RABOMS Act compliances are being satisfied in the industry. Robin, flip. Okay, so we've covered simplex, we've covered national. Now let's talk about zombie incursions. What do you got, Robin?
Yeah, so it's always good to start off a zombie story with a good zombie joke, but I couldn't think of any. I must be going brain dead or something. But, anyway, we've laid some good foundation here for this conversation about now that we know how the 911 system works. How does it work in an overloaded brain dead situation? So I do want to cover a few more key points before we get into our spooky example. And number one, there is no homogeneous 911 nationwide network. The 911 network is comprised of individual selective routers, or people call them 911 tandems, that serve regions, if you will. And they're not interconnected. What that means is that, like, if a call on a VoIP system, Thomas showed that that diagram where we have a national VoIP system that's servicing both buildings in Denver and in Raleigh, North Carolina, right? If you've got that system and for some reason that call routes, a 911 call routes to the PSAP in Raleigh, North Carolina, but the originator was actually in Denver, there is no quick way for the PSAP in Raleigh to transfer that call over to Denver. There's just, it's not interconnected the way you might expect it to be. So that's that second point, is transferring calls can take time. Another example of issues where we have transferring calls and these limitations in the system is on a state line, right? You've got, I've been in these PSAPs where you have a PSAP that's literally the next county over is across the state line, and it's being served by a different 911 tandem or 911 selective router. They're not able to quickly transfer that 911 call across to that adjacent call center across the state line. And so you've got some problems there, and seconds can mean, a lot of difference in some of these emergencies. And so no, in the end, nobody wants to hear a busy signal, and then when you get to the situation in like a zombie incursion where you start to get just tons of calls coming in, nobody really wants to hear a busy signal. So let's get into it. So let's start with where where do zombie apocalypses start, right? They all start in Hollywood. All right, it's a known fact. We're gonna so we're gonna use Hollywood as our example here. Hollywood has a population. The area in Hollywood in Los Angeles County has a population of about 66,000 people. Um, it it happens to be served by the West Hollywood Station, which is part of the county sheriff's office group. It's a PSAP there that serves this population area of about 66,000 people. I haven't been to this PSAP explicitly, but I've been to a bunch of them like this, and they're going to have probably up to 7 positions that will be operating in this West Hollywood station. And at any given time, they may have 3 to 7 call takers or telecommunicators or 911 operators sitting at those positions answering calls. It's going to vary depending on a staffing day. So when we've got this zombie incursion going on in an afternoon, they may only have 4 call takers working, four operators answering those calls. And so now you've got a limitation in terms of how many calls they can answer, right? So what happens, right? The zombies appear, because that's the way it always works, right? They're going to appear on US 101, the highway that's going down through the middle of Hollywood. So they appear. There's somebody driving a truck. They swerve to miss the zombie. They crash. It starts a chain reaction. We start to see all kinds of car crashes on the highway. The zombies start doing their thing and growing and infiltrating the areas. Things start spilling out into the businesses. They start breaking the windows of the businesses. So you got people starting to call 911, right? And you're going to have 911 calls coming in from all kinds of different areas. A lot of wireless calls are going to come in. So in that area where that guy crashed his truck, you're going to have at least 5 or 6 people that are going to witness that probably, and they're all going to dial 911, right? So there's 5 911 calls right there. And then you've got it as it expands, and you're starting to move into these areas where they start tearing apart the businesses and moving through the neighborhood. They start spilling onto side streets, start spilling through the whole Hollywood area, right? You start to get all kinds of calls into 911. People are going to call. You're going to have the people in their house starting to look up Siri. Siri, how do I handle a 911 incursion? Oh, you call 911. Okay. Hey, Siri, help me dial 911. You're going to get all kinds of calls from that perspective. Yeah, I should not do that on live. And so we're going to have all kinds of stuff like that going on. A lot of calls coming in, and again, we're limited based on the number of seats that they have at that station. So what's going to happen, right, is they can handle so many calls. They're going to start getting recordings, and then some of those calls are going to start failing over to the Los Angeles 911 calls taking station, right? There's going to be other areas. The Los Angeles main center has, I think, 50 or 60 seats. So they're going to be able to handle a lot more calls. But eventually, right, those zombies, they're taking everything over. Eventually, they make their way into the West Hollywood station. They consume those call takers. And now you start to get in the situation where we start to see fast, busy signals, and the system is just completely overwhelmed with calls. Not only can the call takers not take the calls, but the originating networks don't have the capacity to manage the calls, and so on and so forth. Now, there's a plus and minus to this. The good thing to this is that it's going to be contained within that area. Again, getting back to that aspect of we don't have a fully interconnected system, right? The problem is going to be contained to the Los Angeles area. We're not going to end up with a total overwhelming of calls going off into San Diego and San Francisco and Arizona and so on and so forth. Eventually, there is an isolation effect here that's going on. The problem though that we can't deal with though is simply the fact that there's limitations built into the system. So what's going on in the meantime? So we're prioritizing calls within the West Holly system, but outside of California, the disaster, and the rest of the nation's call centers are unfazed. They don't have a problem with this, right? They're not going to be overloaded again because it's going to be contained to that geographical area. But let's talk, let's get back to that original question, Thomas, of what happens to bandwidth? How does the bandwidth network handle this zombie apocalypse?
We handle it gracefully. Do you want to flip forward?
Do you see that?
Yep. I do not. But you on your screen you have the big three?
I got the big three.
Okay,
yeah.
It'll show up on mine in a moment. So gracefully, bandwidth has built interconnection to approximately 1,000 of those local 911 clusters, and those are the selective routers you mentioned, and in turn, those 1,000 points of interconnection are connected to the local 911 call centers, or those PSAPs. What we have done is we built a network that is dramatically over-engineered. Every time we route a 911 call, there is a key, something called an emergency services query key, that we use to steer and control that call. What we have built out in our network is roughly a 3x capacity of the actual 911 call takers that can be answering a 911 call across the nation. So if you think in terms of 6,000 public safety answering points, they all have a set of seats. Average number of seats is around 4 to 5. And so that means that you have between 24,000 and 25,000 911 call takers. And all of those seats are not necessarily populated at any one time. They are all populated on July 4th because that's your 911 call peak for the year. That's another webinar right there. But what we've done is, for every local PSAP, we have over-provisioned so that we can stage 3x the number of calls than can actually be dealt with at any one time. And so if there's a cluster in Hollywood and California that is experiencing load, we can stack up calls for them beyond the human capacity to answer, and it utterly doesn't affect anywhere else in the nation and our ongoing call capacity. Just as a thought bubble around that, you're thinking, that's 70,000 calls, that's a lot. Bandwidth today can host on our network over 1 million simultaneous call connections. Okay, that's not doing 1 million calls a day. That means 1 million calls can be connected through our network at a moment in time, of which 70,000 of them would be our top priority, which if we delivered to all of public safety across the nation, we would saturate the network. So we're wildly over provisioned. So for the Rev.io folks who are using bandwidth services, and you've got footprint in a couple of municipalities or maybe statewide, you're in good hands, although we can't use that particular marketing phrase.
Good. All right. So how does this all end?
So my screen isn't working, but I actually have a theory. I have a preference for how this zombie incursion ends, which is a hero arrives. My personal preference would be Arnold Schwarzenegger. Nick Nolte would do in a pinch, but they come in, with some great piece of technology, antivirus, and they save the day. And then slowly over time, the 911 calls subside. The call takers who have been turned into zombies get, switched back to regular call takers, and that local spike of congestion dissipates within the network.
Very good. So the hero saves the day, and another topic we wanted to talk about, Thomas, was some of these people in the zombie incursion may have survived by working from home, but getting serious for a second, this is a very realistic use case as well. And we got some thoughts about working from home, the work from home users that are out there. A lot of us have in this situation today, either, we use that zombie example, but realistically today, a lot of us have taken a desk phone or phone or a soft phone and gone home, and we're working from home. And we've got this scenario here that's relatively serious. And so there's a few key points we want to make here. How do I manage my location per the regulations? So again, we come back to those regulations, right? That phone is still an interconnected VoIP device, and it needs to be able to dial 911. And how do I manage my location per regulations as I take my phone home? The Rev.io, your customers can and should use a dynamic E911 technique like we talked about, that can be used to do this. Leveraging dynamic technologies help solve this problem. Absolutely. And again, go ahead, Thomas.
There's two classes of solutions here, and again, because of the myriad of technologies that are involved, there's no one size fits all solution, but there are two general classes of solution. One is automatic location discovery. And there's some technology behind that, and that's what we were talking about with dynamic location routing and things like that. The other is making it easier for an end user, an employee of an enterprise, to self-provision an address when they're at home. Here's the problem that the industry, with increasing technologies and increasing regulations, as we described right at the beginning of this, when they intersect, the complexities are as follows. An enterprise, take bandwidth. We've got 3 buildings in the Raleigh, North Carolina area, 750 employees, offices in Rochester and Denver, and a couple of people who are remote working from home. Actually, a lot of us are working from home today, but let's focus on the offices. When we build our PBX, our VoIP system, just for ourselves, we've got 3 physical office locations in Denver, Rochester, and Raleigh to provision. We've got 3 buildings in Raleigh to provision and multiple floors and multiple suites in those buildings. So we're talking about managing less than probably 20 or 30 addresses. But if our entire workforce, and we have, all go home and work from home, now we have 750 addresses. None of them are in these known locations because someone could be in an apartment, they could go across the street, they could move their apartment. And so the address management either needs to be made in an automated fashion, what we were describing as dynamic location routing, or in an end user self-provisioning fashion. And we've got some partners like 911 Secure and some other folks that are in that space. So if folks are thinking, what's the magic bullet that's going to kill the werewolf? There isn't one. There is, oh boy, maybe that's a little bit morbid. There are multiple solutions that need to be selected from depending on the use case. There you have it.
Very good. All right. Just to double down on that for a second, Thomas. Yeah, the bottom line here is that supporting remote workers is going to take time and effort and resources. There's no if, ands,
Exactly.
or buts. That's the bottom line here.
Yep.
As we said early on, there's a lot of collision of several different bodies of work here, regulatory, technology, so on and so forth. The reality is it's just going to take time and effort and resources. That's what it comes down to. It's hard work.
Yep.
All right. So to summarize things, we've got this list of treats, best practices. There's about 10 here listed. We're not going to read through every single one. I want to highlight some of them and try and throw a few more jokes in before we open it up for questions. So number one is these regulations, kind of like what we were talking about, these regulations are hard. They're going to be tested. And what I mean by tested is they will be tried eventually someday in a court of law. We've been doing this a long time, and unfortunately, Thomas and I have been involved in lawsuits over the years, mostly as expert witnesses and we witnessed that this is just part of the industry. This is what happens. So what we recommend is consult an attorney. Be intentional in your conversations with those attorneys, and insert your bad zombie attorney joke here.
There's a vampire joke in there somewhere, Robin.
Or a vampire joke as well. Yes, there's definitely a vampire joke there. About talking with the attorneys. Talk with your attorneys about the regulations and what's best for your business, because it's gonna happen. That's number one. Another point I want to highlight here is testing. Bandwidth has this 933 testing technology, a 933 testing technique where you can test endpoints and make test calls without bugging public safety. But regardless of that, we recommend a good treat, a good best practice is to test your system and make sure that it's working. Make sure that those endpoints are provisioned properly. Make sure those addresses down to that line 2 information, including a floor or a suite number or a room number, is working properly. That is a good thing.
Yeah. So yeah, let me double down on that one. 933 testing through bandwidth services is always free. It always terminates not at the public safety answering point, but in an IVR, interactive voice response unit, that will read off the number you've dialed from and the address line 1 and address line 2, the Ray Bombs Act dispatchable location. So just moments ago, we were talking about all the difficulties of address management from work from home. Well, the very first thing that your employees should do, or your customers should do, when they are in that work from home system and they have, figured it out and done their provisioning and they're executing it, is the employee arrives at home, they set up their system, make a 933 call, check that it works.
Very good. And I'm going to tie this into the last point here real quick, jump ahead and say, continuously monitoring 911 compliance. Use 933 can very much be a great tool or testing can be a great tool in monitoring your compliance. Again, getting back to that, imagine yourself in front of a jury or a judge someday saying, oh yeah, I did what I had to do to make sure the 911 calling worked. Just continuously monitor and make sure you're compliant. Find a good notification recipient. And I want to think about this in terms of context, right? I mean, you need to think holistically in terms of the context of the physical location where this phone system is, the regulated phone systems are. So a building, think about that front desk or that security desk or something like that. In a hotel situation, think about the front desk of the hotel. That's the appropriate notification recipient. In a school, right? The main the main office of the school, that's a perfect place for the notification recipient for the Kari's Law notifications that have to happen at the time of a 911 call. But be intentional and think through that. It doesn't take too much to think through that and figure out what's the appropriate thing to do here, and apply a best practices there across the enterprises that you're working with.
So that's such a really good point. Notifications don't need to go to a single person. Okay, when you think of notifications, think in terms of what happens during a fire drill. What happens during a fire drill, the big alarm goes off. In Bandwidth's case, and in many enterprises' case, there are people that are designated floor captains. They put on a red hat, a literal red hat that says floor captain, and they marshal the people to go to the various exits. Those are the same people that can get trained and receive the notification that says a 911 call has been made from the building. All the floor captains can be informed. The floor captain of the floor with the 911 event then can take his method of procedure to make sure that the security doors have someone ready and waiting to open them for first responders. It can be tied into the enterprise's existing fire compliance or compliance officer type things that you're doing today. Anyway, there you have it.
Very good, very good, very good. Couple more points to make here. Don't intercept calls. So I'm gonna move over to the middle of the right-hand column here. Provide that direct dialing to 911 and don't intercept the calls. There's a temptation out there to intercept the calls in a number of different fashions. Number one is maybe I've got a security desk that I want to process the 911 call first. The best practice is not to do that. The best practice is to go ahead and get that call to the authority, to the 911 call center as quick as possible. Again, seconds save lives. Seconds matter in this situation. And so that's one way where calls get intercepted. Don't do that. Just provide direct dialing into 911. And then finally, the last point I want to make before we move on to questions is preparing for next gen 911. It's coming. Next gen 911. I mean, we could probably get into all kinds of jokes about next gen and
and the specter of change.
And the specter of change and how it's there's been ghost implementations and so on and so forth. But the bottom line is that it's coming. It is out in some states already, but it's still pretty much voice services only. But we're starting to get into more text to 911. Images, video, those types of things. and prepare for that in terms of make sure you get services that are compatible with that moving forward. All the bandwidth services are absolutely compatible with next gen environments moving forward. In fact, as Thomas mentioned, we have stolen some next gen techniques on the originating services side for those dynamic location routing solutions that we've deployed. So there's good stuff here going on with next gen. Prepare for it. It's coming.
Yep.
All right.
There we have it. I think we've got a nice block of time left for some Q&A.
Very good.
That was great, Thomas and Robin. Thank you guys so much for your time. Before we begin the Q&A portion of the presentation, I'd like to thank our audience for joining us today and review a few housekeeping items. The first reminder is that we're always interested in topics that you'd like to learn more about, so please submit your topic ideas in the Q&A box. In addition, the full webinar recording will be emailed to you within 2 weeks. Lastly, if you've submitted any questions during the presentation that don't get addressed in the live Q&A, we will be following up with you individually via email. Before we get to the Q&A, I'd like to announce the winner of the Yeti Tundra Cooler. Congratulations to Trisha Kurtekos. We will be following up with you with details after the webinar. Now I'd like to ask a few questions from our audience. What happens when someone working from home calls 911 using Alexa?
Let me try that one, Robin.
Yeah,
so Alexa is an Amazon product, and those phones are not on. So Rev.io folks are, you've got your Metaswitch, your Net Sapiens, or you're racking and stacking a set of BroadWorks boxes and providing cloud PBX services. And if one of your customers goes home and they pick up their Alexa, it's not on your network, right? It is a completely independent phone system. Alexa uses an underlying carrier. We'll remain nameless on who the underlying carrier is, but that's that product's responsibility to have, if it's going to process a 911 call, to have collected the location information of where that device is in exactly the same way as you, with your customers and their devices, have a responsibility to collect that information. So it's just another device on another carrier. The brand name is a little bit sparkly, but it's just another phone, and it follows the same processes under that particular owner's responsibility.
Can you talk about misdial protection?
Robin?
Misdial protection. So yeah, I'll take a stab, Thomas, and feel free to jump in with some color here. There's different aspects of misdialing that can happen. One is, Kari's law is absolutely, that's one of the things that Kari's law is all about, to some degree with misdials, is making it easier to dial 911. The other thing that comes to mind with misdialing, is what a lot of people commonly refer to is the butt dial or dialing 911 when they don't intend to, and so forth. And so that is a problem. It's really, the 911 system is designed to pass through a 911 call no matter what happens. So it's going to make it to, the 911 call is going to make it to a PSAP. And then it's going to be up to the PSAP on their standard operating procedures on how they're going to handle that call. Most of them, a lot of those calls end up being what's called an abandoned call, where somebody misdials 911 and then they realize it and they hang up real quick. A lot of times those PSAPs have a policy in place where they will automatically call that caller back. And it takes time to manage that. But it's one of those things where a conservative approach is typically taken on behalf of the PSAPs.
So let me take a half a step back from that. So that you're exactly right on all of the things that public safety do when they do get one of those, misdialed or whatever calls. On Bandwidth's products, we do have a feature to mitigate misdials, and that feature is, and you can turn this on or off on your account, to play what's called a progress announcement that says you have made an emergency call. Your call is going to be processed to the nearest 911 call center. And it's an announcement that takes about 2 or 3 seconds, and it's happening while we're processing other information for the call. But if you we have statistics that demonstrate that such a terse announcement does reduce the number of butt dials, because someone will go, oh my gosh, I'm hearing an announcement that my call is going to 911, and they realize that they've done that, and they'll do a fast hang up. They do a fast hang up during the announcement, the call does not proceed to 911. But this is an account level choice. So you, our clients, can either turn that on or turn that off, or rather, submit a trouble ticket, and we'll turn it on or off for your whole account.
Yeah, and I'll double down and say, to summarize real quick, there are multiple levels of protection against misdials is the bottom line. There's levels at the carriers, there's levels at some of the 911 service providers, and then there's levels at the PSAP.
Exactly.
Okay. Next question.
Who's responsible for updating the ALI database with the floor information?
Thomas, you want to jump in there?
Oh, the specter of the answer. Okay. Okay. This is a mapping question. You're asking who's responsible for floor level mapping. Okay. So I'm not a lawyer. I am unaware of any municipal, state, or federal requirement that says mapping must be provided and mapping must be made available and displayed to public safety. There are products on the market for that, okay? But they are, because it's not a regulated requirement, it is an at-will or a value-added capability. So it steps out of, again, not a lawyer, it steps out of liability chain responsibility and steps into contractual agreement, right? So you've got an enterprise that has maps, and they've bought it from a vendor, and the vendor is managing those maps, and you might have another intermediary party that is going to provide that map information to a particular PSAP that's in that particular municipality. That is a contractual chain, not a regulatory requirement chain. So the answer to your question is whichever party contractually agreed to take on that responsibility.
Yeah, I agree 100%. And it's really, and to come at it from a slightly different angle about the question about, who's required to update the ALI database, to summarize what Thomas says, it depends. It depends on who's ultimately responsible for it, because we're in this world today where you've got a lot of different types of carriers and calls going on. But from a floor level Ray-Bombs Act perspective, right, the regulation says that it's whoever's contracted within the MLTS system, the multi-line telephone system, to update that record. It's a contractual thing.
How does bandwidth handle soft phones being used by work at home users?
Yeah, so in answering that question, there is a different answer if it is a Cisco emergency responder, if it's an Avaya with the 911 secure appliance, if it is a Microsoft Skype for Business, Microsoft Teams, we get into brand level details, okay? And earlier I described there are two general schools of thought. One is automated location discovery, and which does require a whole lot of provisioning. We can get into those details potentially in another webinar. And then end user self confirmation of their location. So for example, just to get into a little bit in the weeds on this one, you can have a laptop and you can have an appliance on the laptop that is watching the NAT address, NAT. This is the masked IP address that the laptop is using at that moment in time, and looking for NAT address changes. The NAT address will change if, for example, you move the laptop from one floor of a building to another, or you close your laptop and bring it home, you open it, your NAT address will change. And so that signals, for example, using School of Thought 2, that signals a pop-up to the end user to say, did you move, and what's your new location? That is a technique, but there are a family of techniques depending on the make, model, and vintage of the products that are at hand.
Yeah, another technique I want to throw out there is you talked about a soft phone on a laptop, Thomas, but there's also soft phones on a smartphone device, right?
Correct.
Microsoft Teams comes to mind. They've got an application that runs on a smartphone, and it can dial 911. In that instance, that application has access to a GPS chipset on the phone, and it can actually determine an XY or latitude longitude coordinate set that it can pass on. And that's one of the things bandwidth does, is it's able to consume that type of location information in the context of a multifaceted VoIP system like this, telephone system like this, and use that to route the call as well. So
Yep.
there's like you said, Thomas, there's a ton of specific examples that are brand aware or brand specific.
I think we've got time for one or two more questions.
So for notifications, who should be notified for work at home users?
That's a great question. It is a policy question. It is not a, it is a policy and best practices question. And again, I'm not a lawyer, but I am unaware of a regulation within Kari's law that says whom should receive the notification. And for work from home, the beauty of notifications is, and I tried to make this point a little earlier, is it's not a simplex. It's not, oh, I'm a company, I've got 1,000 employees, which person, singular, is receiving the notification if one of the 1,000 people in the building make a 911 call? No. Notifications can be plural. In the example that I provided earlier for bandwidth, we've got 3 buildings in Raleigh and floor captains in the case of fire drills, for example, and multiple notifications going out in the case of a 911 call. So all parties in the case of work from home, should be informed. If the person is so remote that there's nothing you can do, at least you can be aware of the event and attempt to call them or use another telecommunications technique, because I am contacted daily by Slack and IM and my mobile phone and my VoIP phone and my dial pad phone and email so no straight answer. You kind of have to think it through.
Yeah, I agree. There's no straight answer, because keep in mind the idea behind the notifications, the intent behind it is to notify somebody that can help the first responders. And
Right.
so in a work from home scenario, I would turn the question around and go, well, you want to notify who can help that person the most. It may not be as clear cut as in an office situation. It probably is not. But again, this is it comes down to policy. Yep. and adopting a best practice across the board.
And talk to your attorney. Yep. You've got policymakers in your organization. And there's multiple levels of organization. We're talking about bandwidth as a network provider, and the Rev.io client as a telecommunications provider, and then your customers, an enterprise or a small to medium business. The answer is going to be very based on your role in that value chain.
We got time for maybe one more.
All right, so for the last question for today, for car dealerships, should line location 2 be a department, for example, service, parts, etc.?
Actually, so let me take a swing at this, Robin, and then you can jump in.
Yep.
Let's even refine it to a car dealership in the state of, I think, Michigan or Missouri. They've got a 7,000 square foot zone requirement where in a long rambling building, the location has to be down to of a phone has to be down to that level of acuity. So when you're thinking about this, don't think about it as the car dealership IT manager, what address do I need to put for these phones? Have the perspective of, I am the ambulance attendant walking up to the front door of the car dealership, and now I am looking at address line 2. It might see parts, it might say service center or parts department, or if it was a Harley Davidson dealership, motor clothes, right? Those are useful pieces of information that are intuitively obvious to the ambulance attendant attempting to render service. Saying quadrant 45 or cubicle 39 is not intuitively useful to the individual. So look at it from the perspective of the person who's attempting to utilize that information immediately to render service immediately. Robin?
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. I mean, that's exactly it. I was actually having this conversation with somebody the other day about this relative to what's appropriate. And again, it's policy, but I think what you said, Thomas, is right on. Think about it in terms of I'm a police officer, I'm an EMS, EMT, I'm a fire, the fire captain showing up on site. What information is going to get me to that place as quick as possible? Department name could be a good choice, but again, it's policy. It's one of those things that we're going to see these best practices develop over time. But I think starting there is a good starting point.
Yeah. One last thought. If you're actively grappling with these questions and trying to answer them, trying to come up with a good solution, you are absolutely on the right path. That is exactly the responsible thing to do, both as a vendor and as an employer providing these value-added life-saving services, just like doing a fire drill. So you're here asking those questions. Good on you.
Very good.
Well, it looks like we're just about at time. So Thomas and Robin, thanks again. Enjoy the rest of your day, everyone.
Thanks very much.
Thanks, everyone.